The first time Ryu Jin-woo closed his eyes in 6 years, it happened in a ballroom full of people who had already decided what Nia Ellis was worth. A woman in pearls had handed Nia an empty flute without looking at her face. A man with a polished smile had asked which agency had sent her, as if she could only belong in the room by carrying someone else's tray. Two younger socialites had glanced at her bronze skin, her plain black dress, the blue thread bracelet at her wrist with its tiny silver bell, and then looked away with the faint boredom reserved for women they thought existed beneath notice. Nobody announced the insult. They performed it. Nia kept her spine straight anyway. Then the danger came. A waiter moved too carefully through the chandelier's gold light, balancing champagne with the rigid caution of a man hiding more than glass. Nia saw the angle of his wrist, the hard set of his shoulders, the way his eyes stayed fixed not on the guests, but on Jin-woo's throat. Security had not noticed. The quartet kept playing. Seoul's richest people kept smiling. Jin-woo swayed once, not from wine, from exhaustion so deep it looked like a ghost taking hold. Nia reached him first, her palm pressed against his chest. The silver bell on her bracelet gave one soft chime. Everything changed. The feared king of Seoul's underworld exhaled as if dragged back from the edge of a cliff. His eyes closed for one impossible heartbeat. The waiter froze. A security man finally lunged. Crystal burst across the marble. Screams broke the music. When the room steadied, Jin-woo opened his eyes and looked at no one but Nia. "Where did you get that bracelet?" he asked. And in the silence that followed, one question settled over the ruined gala like smoke. How could a maid touch the most dangerous man in Seoul and become the only thing that calmed him? Before dawn, the whole mansion would know Nia Ellis had done what no doctor, mistress, or bodyguard had managed in 6 years. 3 days earlier, Nia had entered the mountain estate with one suitcase, 2 pairs of shoes, and the kind of pride hardship sharpened instead of softened. Seoul had not been a dream. It had been a last option. Atlanta had taken her mother, then her apartment, then the job that had barely kept her above water. A church contact had connected her with a placement service. The position paid well, came with housing, and required silence. At that stage of survival, silence felt cheaper than homelessness. The mansion rose from the hillside like something carved out of money and winter air. Glass walls reflected pines and sky. The floors held the cool sheen of imported stone. Every hallway smelled faintly of cedar, polished brass, and expensive restraint. Nia had grown up knowing the difference between wealth that welcomed and wealth that watched. This house watched. The head housekeeper, Madame Kwon, did not hide her disapproval. "You will work the Upper East Wing," she said. "You will not address the master directly. You will keep your voice low. You will remember you are temporary." Nia set down her bag. "Then it's good I don't plan to make being underestimated permanent." Madame Kwon's mouth tightened. That evening, the staff meal was laid out in the service kitchen, where steam clouded the windows and the smell of soup filled every corner. Nia reached for a seat. Madame Kwon placed a tray in front of her instead. Temporary staff eat in the corridor. Nobody objected. Nobody met Nia's eyes. It was the oldest kind of cruelty, the kind that relied on a room full of witnesses pretending they saw nothing. Nia lifted the tray but stayed where she was. "If I'm qualified to clean your employer's house," she said evenly, "I'm qualified to sit in it." The kitchen doors opened. Ryu Jin-woo stepped inside in black trousers and a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled once at his forearms. He looked less like a man arriving for breakfast than a blade someone had taught to breathe. His face gave away nothing, but exhaustion lived under his eyes like a second shadow. His gaze moved from Nia's tray to the empty chairs. "Is there a shortage of seats in my house?" he asked. Madame Kwon swallowed. "No, sir." "Then why is Miss Ellis standing?" The title alone hit the room like cold water. He pulled out a chair near the center of the table. "Sit." Nia sat. Madame Kwan apologized through clenched teeth. Jin-woo took his own place and said, without raising his voice, "If she is disrespected again, the person responsible will leave before lunch." Public power reversal number 1 came so quietly it stunned everyone more than shouting would have. Later, as Nia changed linens upstairs, she heard footsteps pacing above her long after midnight. When Nia finally saw the man behind the rumors in the dark corridor outside her room, he looked nothing like a monster and far too much like someone losing a war against sleep. He stood outside her door barefoot, jacketless, and visibly holding himself together by force. Amber wall lights softened the corridor, but not enough to hide the tension in him. His breathing was too measured. His jaw was locked. The house around them was silent, except for the distant hush of rain beginning against the glass. Nia had known men who performed power loudly. Jin-woo wore his like a wound stitched shut. "You should be sleeping," she said. One corner of his mouth shifted. "That advice has not worked well for 6 years." His voice was low, controlled, almost gentle, which made the answer land harder. Nia noticed a thin scar crossing one wrist. She also noticed the way his gaze dropped to the bracelet at her hand. The tiny silver bell caught the light. "That sound," he murmured, "doesn't belong to this house, but it feels older than the walls." "It was part of a pair," Nia said. "Bought cheap at a church market during a semester abroad. I kept it because it survived everything else." Something unreadable moved across his face. The next morning, Jin-woo ordered her to accompany the household team to a private breakfast meeting at a luxury restaurant downtown. The dining room floated above the city in glass and gold, with orchids perfuming the air and white linens so crisp it looked untouched by human hands. Nia moved through the setup with efficient calm, ignoring the curious looks from clients who were rich enough to mistake themselves for important. Halfway through the meeting, an investor's wife snapped her fingers without lifting her eyes from the menu. "You there, more water." Nia did not move. "My name is Nia." The woman looked up slowly. Then Nia. "More water." Soft laughter stirred around the table. Jin-woo set down his glass. The sound was small, but the room obeyed it instantly. He rose, crossed to Nia, and pulled out the empty chair beside his own. "Sit with us." The woman flushed. Her husband began apologizing before she did. Nia sat with her chin high, not as a servant indulged for a moment, but as a woman being restored in full view of the people who had tried to cut her smaller. Jin-woo looked around the table. Anyone who cannot manage respect may finish breakfast elsewhere. Public power reversal number 2 settled over the room with lethal grace. On the drive back to the estate, the city blurred past in silver towers and rain-dark alleyways. Nia looked at him. "Why do you keep doing that?" He stared out the window. "Because some rooms deserve to be corrected." Behind the convoy, a black sedan stayed with them too long. By the time Nia realized they were being followed, she had already become important to men willing to kill for what Jin-woo had not yet said aloud. The storm broke over the estate before nightfall, rolling across the mountain in sheets of rain and white-blue lightning. The staff retreated early. Doors clicked shut. Even the security team moved with tighter shoulders. Nia had nearly finished polishing the library rail when she found Jin-woo standing alone before the windows, his reflection cut into pieces by the rain. The library smelled of leather, old paper, and cedar smoke trapped in the stone from winters past. It was a room built to suggest permanence. Yet, Jin-woo looked like a man who trusted nothing that could not survive fire. "You haven't eaten," Nia said. "My appetite and I haven't spoken in years." The answer should have sounded dry. Instead, it sounded tired. Lightning flashed. For an instant, grief showed plain on his face. Nia set the polishing cloth aside. What happened 6 years ago? He stayed still so long she thought he might ignore her. Then his voice came out low and stripped of performance. "Betrayal," he said. "My father died before the guards reached the hall. My mother called my name once. The men inside my house knew where every camera failed, every lock delayed, every loyal man slept. His hands tightened behind his back. I lived. That was the beginning of the punishment. Private vulnerability moment number 1 opened in the silence after that. Nia moved closer, slow enough to let him refuse. He did not. When her fingers touched his hand, the silver bell on her bracelet gave its small, familiar sound. His eyes shut as if that chime reached somewhere medicine never had. She led him to the sofa by the cold fireplace. Rain battered the glass. The room darkened around them. His breathing, at first hard and shallow, gradually lost its edge. Then, almost angrily, as though surrender offended him, Ryu Jin-woo fell asleep. Not long. Barely 20 minutes, but real. When he woke, he looked dazed by the fact of peace. You should not have seen that. Why? Because now you know where to hurt me. Nia held his gaze. Or maybe now I know where you've already been hurt. If that silence tightened something in the chest, the night had only begun. By morning, word of Jin-woo's first real sleep had spread through the mansion, and somewhere beyond its gates an old enemy had started listening for the woman responsible. The house turned on Nia 2 mornings later. She was called to the central foyer, where marble floors reflected chandelier light in cold pools, and every member of the household staff stood lined against the walls. Madame Kwan held a velvet case with both hands, triumph showing through the performance of outrage. This was found in Ms. Ellis's room, she announced. One of the late Madame's heirlooms. The lid opened. Inside lay a diamond brooch so expensive it seemed absurd even under the estate's roof. Nia did not touch it. No, it wasn't. Madame Kwan lifted her chin. Are you calling me a liar? Before Nia could answer, Jin-woo descended the stairs. He wore charcoal black. His face was blank. That was always when he looked most dangerous. His gaze passed over the brooch, then settled on security. Who searched her room? He asked. No one replied. A younger maid began crying before the silence finished settling. She dropped to her knees and confessed everything at once. Madame Kwan had ordered the brooch planted. Cash had changed hands. The money had come from a man tied to Assemblyman Han Do-shik, the polished public servant whose smile appeared in charity magazines and whose shadow touched every ugly thing whispered in Seoul's back rooms. Nia stayed where she was, shoulders straight. False accusation always hurt more when it wore respectability. Jin-woo never looked at her while the truth came out. He looked only at Madame Kwan. You will leave this house in 10 minutes, he said. And if Han contacts you again, you will tell my people before you answer him. She tried to apologize. He turned away before she finished. That evening, Nia packed a small bag in the service wing anyway. The room smelled of starch, lavender soap, and the bitterness of wanting dignity without asking permission for it. Jin-woo found her folding the last of her clothes. You're leaving, he said. I'm deciding. He placed an envelope of cash, apartment keys, and a passport wallet on the bed. Go somewhere safe. She looked at the items, then at him. Am I a person to you, or a threat to your concentration? His silence answered too much. After he left, Nia sat with the little blue bracelet in her palm. The silver bell brushed her thumb, and memory tugged at her from somewhere rain-soaked and distant. A church courtyard. Smoke. A young man bleeding through an expensive shirt, her own hands tying off a torn strip of blue thread. She had heard this bell with him before. Before sunrise, Nia remembered exactly where she had met Jin-woo 6 years earlier and why someone powerful might kill to keep that memory buried. The charity gala occupied the Imperial Hanul Hotel ballroom, where white roses climbed mirrored pillars and money arranged itself under chandeliers pretending to be virtue. Nia did not enter in uniform. One of the younger maids, loyal now in the way loyalty becomes fierce after justice is witnessed, had slipped her a bronze silk gown from the estate's reserve wardrobe. The dress was simple, elegant, and impossible to ignore. Against the gold light, Nia looked less like a servant who had wandered into the wrong room and more like the kind of woman the room had failed to deserve. Assemblyman Han Do-shik saw her and smiled the way men smiled when they expected a trap to feel like a compliment. "Interesting," he said loudly enough for nearby donors to hear. "Mr. Ryu now brought household help to black tie events." Several guests laughed. Not many. Enough. Nia's gaze did not drop. "If that was your polished version," she said, "it needed more practice." A hush spread, thin and electric. Jin-woo arrived at her side without visible haste. "Not household help," he said. "Ms. Ellis," Han tilted his head. "My mistake." "No," Jin-woo replied, his voice quiet as a blade sliding free. "Your choice." He took Nia's hand, not as possession, not as spectacle, but as public allegiance, and led her to the seat on his right, the seat reserved for honor. Cameras turned, donors shifted, society women suddenly found their champagne very interesting. "Anyone who speaks to her without respect," Jin-woo said to the room at large, "will do so once." Public power reversal number 3 dropped through the ballroom like a seal on fate. Dinner continued under the strain of it. A violinist played near the stage. Crystal chimed softly. Candlelight trembled over silverware. Nia's fingers drifted to her bracelet as memory sharpened all at once. 6 years earlier, during a volunteer shift at a church shelter, she had run into the courtyard during a warehouse fire nearby. Rain had been pouring. Sirens had split the night. A wounded young man had staggered through the gate, refusing to collapse. To keep him conscious, she had torn the second bracelet from her wrist and tied it around his arm while telling him to stay awake. Across the table, Jin-woo looked at her with the same stunned recognition. He remembered too. If that revelation stole a breath, the night was about to ask for much more. The moment Nia understood she had once saved Jin-woo's life, she also understood why Han needed her silenced before the past reached daylight. Nia left the gala before midnight, not because she was afraid, but because she finally saw the shape of the decision in front of her. She could remain in Jin-woo's house and let powerful men define her as weakness, leverage, or ornament, or she could choose herself. Her apartment across the river was narrow, clean and honest, in a way luxury often was not. Pipes clicked in the wall. A delivery scooter coughed in the alley below. Someone down the hall was frying garlic with scallions, and the scent drifted under the door. Nia sat at the tiny kitchen table and opened an old cloud folder from her student exchange year. Photographs, volunteer rosters, blurred snapshots taken in rain. Then she found it. A grainy image of the church shelter gate. Nia stood in the foreground, soaked and half-turned toward the camera. Near the gate, barely caught by the flash, were 2 men. One was the wounded stranger she now knew had been Jin-woo. The other was younger, cleaner-faced, but unmistakable. Han Do-shik, not as rescuer, as witness. Her pulse sharpened. She enlarged the photo again. At the edge of the frame stood another man opening the private side gate. Bae Jun-tae, the former family steward whose disappearance after the massacre had always been written off as fear. Nia could have sent the image anonymously and disappeared from Seoul before dawn. Instead, she went looking for the retired driver who had once served Jin-woo's parents. He lived above a hardware shop, surrounded by old tools, dust, and the stale scent of oil. When she showed him the image, his hands trembled. "I remember that bell," he whispered, hearing the silver chime at her wrist. "You were the foreign girl in the rain." Bae opened the side gate. Han's men entered after. There it was. The truth. This was the choice moment. She could walk away, protect herself, and leave powerful men to bury one another. Instead, she chose not to be erased from her own life by fear. She chose action with her full name still attached to it. When she called Jin-woo, he answered on the first ring. "I know who opened the gate," she said. His silence turned dangerous. "Stay where you are," he ordered. "No," Nia replied. "You don't get to command my survival for me." Then she ended the call. By the time Jin-woo reached her apartment building, Nia was already gone, headed toward the one witness whose testimony could tear Han's polished empire open. He found her just before dawn at the old church shelter where it had all begun. Rain silvered the courtyard stones. The shelter had been renovated, but memory clung stubbornly to the place. The rusted side hinge still groaned. The stone basin near the entrance still caught rainwater the same way it had 6 years earlier. And when Nia lifted her hand, the tiny bell on her bracelet sounded exactly as it had on the night she knelt beside a bleeding stranger and told him not to die. The retired driver sat with a file thick enough to ruin reputations. Donation ledgers, property transfers, shell charities, signatures connecting Han's public foundation to land stolen from Jin-woo's family after the massacre. Bei's name ran through it like rot through silk. When the old man left them alone, the shelter office went still except for the rain and the soft rattle of the bell. Jin-woo looked at Nia as if 6 years had folded in on themselves. "It was you. I didn't know until tonight. I remembered the voice first," he said, "not the face. A woman in the rain telling me to stay alive as if death would listen." "That sounded like me." He almost smiled. Then the expression broke into something more dangerous because it was honest. "I have not slept in peace since that night," he said, "until you." Private vulnerability moment number 2 did not need tears. It lived in the stripped quiet of a man admitting the exact shape of his ache. Nia stepped closer. "You do not get to call me your weakness." "I know. You do not get to hide me because men like Han are frightened of what I mean to you." "I know. If I stay," she said, "I stay because you earn the right to stand beside me, not because I need rescue." He bowed his head once. "Then let me earn it." She touched the old scar at his wrist, where the missing half of her blue thread bracelet had once been tied. He covered her hand with his, steady and reverent. If that confession landed where it hurt, the reckoning was almost here. Together they walked back into the storm, knowing the next night would either destroy Handoshik in public or hand him one final chance to destroy them first. Han arranged his final defense as spectacle. He announced a press-backed foundation reception at the restored family hotel, filling the ballroom with donors, anchors, columnists, and politicians eager to witness whichever version of the truth won first. White lilies perfumed the air. Cameras waited along the edges. The room gleamed with the kind of wealth that mistook itself for innocence. Han stood at center stage in a midnight suit, smiling like a man who believed narrative alone could save him. Bei Juntae stood near the podium pretending calm. When Jin-woo arrived with Nia at his side, conversation fractured around them. Han welcomed the room, praised service and compassion, and then turned with practiced sorrow towards the guests. "Recent events," he said, "have shown how easily lonely men can be manipulated by ambitious employees who understand the uses of seduction." The insult moved through the crowd in a hot ripple. Nia stepped forward before Jin-woo could answer. "If you are going to lie about me," she said, clear enough for every microphone, "have the courage to say it without perfume." Reporters lifted their devices. Donors leaned in. Han accused her of theft, deceit, and influencing Jin-woo for gain. Bei backed him with a shaking denial. Then the silver bell at Nia's wrist chimed. Just once. The retired driver rose from the second row under protective escort. "That sound," he said, pointing at Nia, "belongs to the girl who saved young Master Ryu the night Bei opened the side gate for Han's men." Gasps broke across the ballroom. Nia handed copies of the ledgers and old photograph to the nearest journalists. Paper moved from hand to hand like fire. Faces changed as quickly as markets. Jin-woo finally took the microphone. "For 6 years," he said, "Handoshik built a public halo over private betrayal. Tonight he answers for fraud, conspiracy, theft, and murder tied to my family's deaths." Investigators entered before Han found his next lie. They moved first to Bei, then to Han. A major donor publicly froze support. Banks had already locked foundation accounts. Han's wife removed her wedding ring and walked out under flashing cameras. Anchors spoke over one another. Social ruin, legal consequence, financial collapse, and personal abandonment arrived at once. Han lunged toward Nia in panic. Jin-woo stepped between them with such stillness that no force proved necessary. "Do not come near her again," he said. Han stopped. When the ballroom finally emptied and the city had chosen its version of the truth, only one unfinished question remained between the man who could finally sleep and the woman who had taught him how. The estate changed after Han's fall. Not all at once, not magically, but enough that even the silence felt different. Staff no longer moved as if catastrophe lived in the walls. Windows stayed open longer. The mountain air reached rooms that had once smelled only of polish and restraint. A new head housekeeper from Busan ran the domestic staff with fairness, sharp tea, and zero patience for petty cruelty. The younger maids laughed in the kitchens without checking the doors first. Nia returned on her own terms. She did not move back into the service wing. Jin-woo had prepared a guest suite overlooking the pines, all warm oak, cream textiles, deep rugs, and morning light spilling over the balcony doors. The room smelled faintly of cedar and white tea. It was thoughtful without feeling like ownership. "This is generous," she said. "It is not a cage," he answered. "Good." That evening, they ate in a smaller dining room instead of the vast formal hall. Rice steamed between them. Grilled fish, broth, and fruit replaced ceremony with something simpler. Outside, cicadas sang in the dark garden. Inside, lamplight softened the hard edges of everything he had built to survive. He told her about his mother's laugh, which had once filled the house before fear replaced it. He told her how his father had believed softness was an indulgence powerful men could not afford. Nia told him about Georgia heat, church hats, overdue bills, and the stubborn dignity of women who kept families alive on little more than faith and skill. When the meal ended, he placed a small velvet pouch beside her plate. Inside was the missing half of the bracelet pair. Blue thread, weathered by years, tiny silver bell intact. "I kept it," he said, "even when I told myself I had forgotten why it mattered." Her throat tightened. She lifted the bracelet carefully, as though touching time itself. "This is not weakness," she said. "No? It's proof you survived long enough to become human again." Later, moonlight silvered the room upstairs. Jin-woo stood at the doorway, looking for once like a man asking rather than commanding. "Stay," he said. Nia studied him. The patience, the restraint, the way he had learned that protecting her did not entitle him to own her. Then she nodded. For the first time in 6 years, Ryu Jin-woo lay down before exhaustion took him by force. He closed his eyes because he trusted her enough to choose sleep. He had ruled Seoul for 6 sleepless years without breaking, but what happened after peace finally entered his house would matter far more than all the fear he had ever inspired. Spring arrived softly on the mountain. Cherry blossoms drifted across the terrace and caught in the stone corners like folded silk. The city below remained itself, brilliant, hungry, unforgiving. But the estate had found a different rhythm, one less ruled by dread than by chosen calm. Han Do-shik's downfall did not stay symbolic. It became official, ugly, and complete. His accounts remained frozen. His foundation collapsed under investigation. Donors withdrew with public statements, carefully crafted to save themselves. His name disappeared from charity boards and society invitations in the same week. His trial began under full media scrutiny, and every polished lie he had ever worn as respectability now sat on record beside evidence too solid to bury. Bae Jun-tae cooperated just enough to reduce his sentence and deepen his shame. Neither man died dramatically. They lived long enough to watch power leave them, which was punishment enough. Nia's dignity did not need saving because she had never surrendered it. But it was recognized now, and recognition mattered in a world built to deny women like her easy respect. She reorganized the household with clear standards and fair pay. With recovered funds from Han's fraudulent charities, she helped establish a support program for migrant women and workers who had been made invisible in wealthy homes all over the city. Safety, once temporary and borrowed, became something she built for others as well as herself. Jin-woo remained feared where fear was deserved. His enemies still found him calm, precise, and impossible to shake. But in private, the change was undeniable. He ate. He rested. He laughed sometimes, quietly, as if learning the shape of the sound. On difficult nights, Nia would sit by the window with him until the city lights blurred and the little silver bell on one bracelet answered the bell on the other. A reminder of rain, of survival, of a night when a stranger had chosen to save a wounded man before knowing his name. One evening, as moonlight poured across the floorboards, Jin-woo took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Jalja," he murmured, "sleep well." This time, when he closed his eyes, there were no ghosts waiting behind them. Only peace,